Abby. So they said it wasn't loud enough back there, but it's as loud as it goes. Do you think it'll be okay once people stop talking? Because they heard me enough to tell me that. It's as loud as it goes.
I'm going to be first up, so we practice.
Alyzha's quite tall.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say, I think, and then somebody else tonight is taller than me, too. Maybe like that. Okay. I don't know what order they're going in, you know, like.
That's my job.
All right. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Good evening. How are y'all doing? That was so sad. How are y'all doing? All right. Is everybody relatively dry? So, okay. All right. Thank you all very much for coming. This is the first week of BFA readings. My name is Mike Scholes. I am a teaching professor in the English department, and it is my pleasure to be the thesis advisor for this cohort of BFAs. They are a bananas sort of group. I love them. They have some antics in store for you tonight, next week, and the week after Thanksgiving. Tonight we have 3 fiction writers, all writing about and in different worlds, so I hope you enjoy them. They're all going to introduce themselves. And it is my pleasure to first introduce Alyzha Harris.
So I'm introducing Tasha. So the first time I saw Tasha, it was during the most banal world literature class in the world. It was the most boring thing I ever sat through. But her poise and quietness made her fade into the background. But the first time I actually met her, I immediately noticed the sarcasm in her voice and the twinkle in her eye. And both of these things, they're very evident in her work. With her witty dialogue and brilliant, intricate worlds, the way she builds her magic systems is an experience in itself. So please help me welcome my friend, Natasha.
Thank you, Alyzha, for that wonderful introduction. Okay, so the story that I'm going to be reading tonight is chapter 1 in a book that I have been slowly working on and making progress on. And it started as a way for me to write about an antagonist who is so relatable to people that it's hard to see them as the antagonist. And it turned out to become a story where pretty much everyone in it is very morally gray, so it's very difficult to find out who the protagonist is. But anyway, so chapter 1 starts out with explaining how the main character, Cal, gets to that point of morally gray. So without further ado, Cal watched Penny sneak around the shed while she called out, her wavy brown hair pulled into a ponytail, the end of which was caught in the loop of her white scarf. The late September air wasn't cold enough for the scarf, but it had been a gift from her godmother when she died, so Penny used every excuse to wear it. Honestly, how does she think tiptoeing will help her stay quiet while she's busy shouting out my name? Cal thought. Shh! Be quiet! Cal whispered as he jogged up behind her. If Mrs. McCarthy wakes up, but we're done for. The big green and gray storage shed was just outside Sea Hall where the girls stayed, and the old woman was a notoriously light sleeper. It was the main reason the headmaster of Arlo's boarding school put her in charge of the dorm. She was nice enough, but if caught, their night would be over before it even began. Before he could react, Penny sucked in a breath and swung her fist into Cal's face, snapping his head to the side. Immediately, her hands flew to her face as he stumbled back a step, the blood-red paint on her nails shining in the strangely colorless light of the white moon. Of the 7 moons, the white one was by far the rarest, and with its connection to the dead, it was the only one that was any threat on its own. Most people stayed inside for the night of Seorn Masbloom, but there was going to be a meteor shower that night, and the 2 teenagers wouldn't miss it for the world. Guess I'm better at sneaking than her. Oops. Sorry. Her brown eyes were wide and frantic for a moment until her expression sharpened. You scared the crap out of me. How'd you do that? Cal just grinned, rubbing his jaw. Nice right hook. Now let's go. I don't want to miss anything. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her along in his half jog away from the buildings and towards the opening in the woods on the far side of the property. There wasn't a trail leading to the clearing, but the main path would get them close enough before they had to peel off. He wanted to get there as fast as they could in case someone noticed they were gone, and it was quicker to take the dirt path as far as possible. If they got caught coming back, at least they'd have something to show for it. Slow down, Cal. We have plenty of time before it's supposed to start. She pulled back like an anchor until they slowed to a fast walk a few yards from the edge of the woods, which had lines of colorful light peeking through like eyes. This far from the buildings, the chance of being heard was low as long as they didn't shout, so Cal let Penny set the new pace. Also, did you happen to bring a flashlight? I really don't feel like kissing a tree or breaking an ankle tonight. Nah, I tried checking the supply closet, but I got caught. We'll be fine. The white moon always gives off more light than the others, and we've walked these woods hundreds of times. Yeah, but the glow from the plants is bright enough to catch my attention without giving me any light to see by. I'm like an insect staring at a light until I smack into a branch. Cal grinned and held up his hand as a small flame appeared at the tip of his pointer finger. If you're that worried about it, I could light us a path. Penny glowered at him. So we can burn to death instead? Hard pass. She slapped his hand down to put out the fire. All it takes is one spark, and the freelucan in the plants will go off like a bomb. So I'd rather deal with the bruises. Hey, I've gotten better at controlling it. Better and good are 2 very different things. Cal slouched his shoulders and stuck his jaw out in a pout. Rude, but fair. The wind blew through the trees as the group of bats flapped over their heads. They let the soft sounds of the forest fill the space around them until Penny spoke up again. Wait, did you get another detention without me? Damn, I gotta do something to catch up now. Are you keeping score? Because I got a 2-year head start. Stepping past the first of the trees, Cal released Penny's arm and put his hands in his pockets. It was a habit drilled into him by his parents. Apparently, they thought if his hands were tied down, he couldn't get into any trouble. Once the trees blocked the buildings, they slowed to a more comfortable walking pace. The path may be smoother than the rest of the forest floor, but there were still some roots popping up in some places. It wouldn't matter how fast they were moving if they ended up face planting. Especially on a night like tonight when the dead sometimes play tricks. Cal had never understood the fear that came with the white moon. Even the name Seorn Masbloom was whispered with caution as if people were afraid that saying it too loud would direct the dead to their door. As if dead walking was anything more than those long dead being dramatic. The spirits may look solid, but all they can really do is put some images in the minds of the living, and that only happens when they sleep. Usually, anyway. Those years don't count. Besides, it's more of a loose tally anyway. She paused her climb over a fallen Daratoa tree and sat down. The tree's blue flowers were scattered among the pine needles on the ground, their spined petals giving off a strong, perfumed scent to an almost stifling degree. Of all the flowers that Cal had come across in his years of living, Castaphia, lilies, roses, etc., the flowers from the Daratoa were his least favorite. They were pretty enough, but the smell gave him a headache, which of course meant they were growing all over the grounds of Arlo's. Cal could see the shadow of Penny's legs passing over the slightly glowing leaves and flowers, the glowing veins evidence that the tree had fallen recently. I wouldn't want you to get lonely cleaning the floors. Cal glared at her. There was no real anger behind the look, but she always seemed to get the last word in. Joke's on you. I cleaned the floors last time. This time I have to clean all the windows in the B classrooms. It sounded more depressing than he planned. Oh yeah, sure, Penny said, shifting to look down at him. That's my mistake. I'm sure you'll have loads of fun with that. Cal could practically feel the sarcasm dripping from her words, and instead of continuing to fail at defending himself, he gave in and laughed with her. The two 14-year-olds had been friends for over 5 years and had been glued to each other since they met. They were both troublemakers, but Cal, who at a young age had mastered the skill of picking locks with his small magic, tended to be more impulsive, whereas Penny liked to plan everything out beforehand. She claimed that it was to avoid getting caught, but they both knew the real reason was to cause the maximum amount of chaos before inevitably getting into trouble. She always enjoyed a cat challenge. For almost 2 months, she had released crickets into the vents next to the headmaster's office. It took them ages to get them all out. At this point in their trek, the moon was mostly obscured, leaving them with nothing but the soft glow of the freelucan and the leaves and flowers around them. Unfortunately, that meant it was time to get off the path and pick their way through the untamed underbrush. Many of the trees glowed too, but only underneath the thick layer of bark, so they were practically invisible in the dark. They made their way over and under vines, roots, and branches, the sounds of small creatures skittering around them. Occasionally, one of them would lose their footing in spots of mud or trip on the slowly shifting roots of the malveer tree that was at the center of the forest. Malveer trees were impressive sights when fully grown, towering over all the other trees around them. There was never more than one in one place since they tended to steal each other's nutrients. They had no leaves, only vines that wrapped around the branches, leaving just enough light to pass through to the smaller plants below. Its roots spread through the entire forest and never stayed in one place too long, constantly looking for what it needed to survive. After the third time tripping on one of said roots, Cal was tempted to light them on fire, but he didn't feel like being the reason his best friend died in the middle of the woods. For the most part, they stayed vertical, but once Cal's foot slipped into a small hole, and after instinctually reaching for Penny, pulled them both to the ground. They collapsed into giggles for several minutes before straightening themselves and walking on. "So, did you have a hard time sneaking out this time?" Penny asked as she dodged a low branch. "I know Mr. Rouse threatened to have a special lock put on your window so you couldn't get out." "Nah, Rouse is all talk. Besides, if he added a lock for me, it would be punishing my roommate too, and he really can't justify that. Especially with 2 fire wielders. Do you know how hot it gets in there?" "Then what took you so long? You're practically never late to things like this." Cal took a moment to scrape the excess mud off the bottom of his once white sneaker as he answered. "Had to wait for Chris. He doesn't care what I get up to as long as he doesn't see it, so we have an agreement that if I want to sneak out, I need to wait for him to at least pretend to be asleep. He just happened to choose tonight to respond to all of his letters. I swear, he's the only kid in the whole place that has on good terms with his parents." "Yeah, that is weird. Do they just travel a lot?" "I guess so. Anyways, by the time he went to bed, I was already late. Then I had to hightail it across the courtyard and hope no one was looking out the windows." "Ah, so that's the real reason you were in such a rush. You were impatient." Penny rolled her head back before draping her arms over his shoulders. "Poor baby, having a hard time walking anywhere with his poor baby legs." "Oh, get off me." Cal pushed her laughing form away while rolling his eyes. "I'm only like an inch shorter than you, if that. So stop pretending like I'm some gremlin." He batted her hands away as they went to pat his shaggy hair. His parents made him cut it short every time they saw him, so he made it a point to grow it out whenever he could. Of course, then he had to be extra careful not to set it on fire, but that was why he had Penny teach him how to braid. "Whatever you say, Junior." The moment she said the last word, Penny slipped between the twin trees and ducked behind a Christophia bush, its fullness and large flowers almost completely hiding her from view. Cal, the epitome of impulsiveness, ran blindly after her as she tried to jump away. "Ha! Too slow," Cal said as he collided with her. Fortunately, there wasn't much mud in that area. Unfortunately, their momentum still pushed them downward, and they happened to be right next to the old trench. They tumbled down a few feet with their hearts in their throats, grunting and cursing the whole way to the bottom. The trench was only about 4 or 5 feet wide, but 6 or 7 feet deep, so usually they would jump over instead of walking or falling into it. Cal wasn't sure what the original purpose of the trench was, but many of the students at Arlo's would play tag or war and use the trench as a boundary line for different territories. Ow. We probably should have been paying a little more attention. I think I hit my knee on a rock. Penny was laying partially across Cal as she took a moment to breathe. Cal groaned, rubbing his left elbow where it hit a stone on the way down. The earthy smell from the mud filled his nose. "That was my head. Now would you please get off me? You're not exactly light." Pushing herself up, she did a quick once-over to make sure they weren't bleeding before taking off her scarf. She held it up to inspect the mud on it before her warm brown eyes softly glowed, an indicator she was using her earth magic. I wonder what the staff will say if they catch us sneaking back in. We probably look like grave robbers. As they watched, the dark stains on the scarf fell off as if they were just leaves. Or zombies. We could probably scare the shit out of a lot of people looking like the dead tonight, Cal agreed. They looked at each other's silhouetted forms and collapsed into hysterical laughter once again. After a few attempts to collect themselves, they helped each other climb out over the ditch and finally crawled to their feet at the top. Back on more solid ground, they checked themselves over again for any serious injuries. Penny pulled her arms to the side and twisted her back in an attempt to crack it. Ah, fuck. I'm gonna be sore in the morning. Miss Salas, Cal started in a horrible mimicry of Mr. Ralph's posh accent. Did you perchance spout some uncouth language on the grounds of this esteemed and respected school? What would your parents say? Her amusement was palpable, and she answered in the same terrible accent that Cal had used as they continued their walk. Oh, of course not, good sir. I would never dream of shaming this prestigious school or its staff. After all, there is no one better than the most honorable Mr. Charles Ralphs. Cal snickered at her as she did an exaggerated bow. Ever since they arrived at Arlo's boarding school, Mr. Ralphs had been a pain in the neck for both of them. Granted, they had returned the favor on many occasions, but who could blame them? The same thing every day is tedious and dull. I swear, he looks down on us almost as much as that damned Nemec. The creature was a strange cross between a dog and an ape, having all the features of a canine with the added bonus of an extra long front legs with opposable thumbs. Cal thought they were freaky. The gasp that came from his right was laughably dramatic. Hey, don't you dare insult Harold like that. He deserves better than to be compared to that sorry excuse for a headmaster. Harold is a sweetheart. Penny jabbed her finger at Cal's face while she talked, but misjudged the distance and poked him in the eye. Oops, sorry. Man, it's like you want to hurt me tonight. He rubbed at the newest injury in an attempt to get the small pain to fade. Quit complaining, you're fine. Besides, we made it. Penny jumped over another shifting root and jogged the last few feet towards the light in the clearing ahead. It was a fairly small break in the trees, about 20 feet across, but large enough that it gave a full view of the sky, which was thankfully clear. It also had a large flat-topped rock about the size of a big desk in the center that Penny liked to compare to an altar. The two friends would climb up and sit for hours on end any chance they got. It was their place, the only place they could really go without constant eyes on them. See, look, we made it in plenty of time, and nothing creepy happened either. She barely got the words out before the haunting call of the toa-coon broke through the forest, causing her to flinch. The large bird flew over the clearing and showed off its colorful feathers and toothed beak. Smiling wide, Penny turned to look at Cal, who had followed her into the clearing. Her eyes shone with life in the light of the moon. After being sent to Arlo's, Cal was always doing the wrong thing in the eyes of his parents. As an only child, he felt like he didn't have anyone to talk to that would understand. And since he was so concerned with having his parents like him, he ended up scaring away any possible friends by acting as self-righteous as his mother and father. It didn't take long for his parents to drop him off here. Arlo's was where people could send kids they didn't want without getting the bad rep of abandoning them. The perfect loophole. Cal was 7 when he realized he would never be what his parents wanted. So he began to act out in whatever way he could. When Penny arrived 2 years later, he finally learned how to have fun with it. A snap in the distance drew Cal's attention away from his thoughts. Did you hear that? What are the chances of any other student snuck out to watch? Near 0, I'd say, she replied, glancing towards the noise. Most of them are superstitious. Not to mention, I doubt many would lower themselves to stumble around blindly in the muddy woods just to watch a meteor shower. It was probably just an animal. True, there are a lot of deer out there. Penny slowly turned her head to face him. What, do I have something on my face? She gave Cal 3 slow blinks before straightening and taking on a more relaxed and natural stance. She was obviously trying to keep a straight face. So, she started as she examined the dirt under her red nails. Does the beer come from the trees like sap, or should I go looking for a stream instead? Huh? What? Cal gave her an exasperated look. Seriously? You know what I meant. Do I? False innocence pouring from her mouth. I have many talents, but mind reading is not one of them. I'd hate to assume something. Oh, come on. It's not like you never speak in typos. Ha! I don't think I've ever heard someone call it that. Unable to help themselves, two friends laughed uncontrollably for the third time that night, wheezing and clutching their stomachs as they tried to get more air into their lungs. Why are we even laughing? Cal managed to gasp. I don't know, it wasn't even that funny. The shrill, hysterical sound of her words echoed around them. Each time they would start to calm down, they would make eye contact and shrivel into laughter again. After a few minutes, they were completely out of breath and struggling to make their way up the cold rock to sit down. The crisp air was a relief against their warm skin. They fell into a peaceful quiet as they listened to the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of the toacoon in the distance. Cal leaned back and stared at the moon, waiting for the meteors to tear through the atmosphere, and just basked in Penny's presence. He never liked being at Arlo's, though it was better than having his parents at his throat. But at times like those, when he was just existing with Penny, they were his favorite memories. Penny had always been into astronomy, so when she found out about the meteor shower, Cal knew they had to find a way to watch. They'd been looking forward to it for days. Hey, Penny broke the silence above him. Do you think... Crack! The loudest sound Cal had ever heard echoed through the woods, causing him to jump and making his ears ring. Catching himself before he fell off the rock, he sat up and looked around. What the holy fuck was that? He rubbed his ears to get the ringing out and tried to see past the blanket of white light that filled the clearing. There was a weird, spluttering exhale that sounded a little like a sneeze coming from Penny behind him, and he felt something wet splatter on the back of his neck. You good? He asked incredulously as he turned to face her. Cal froze. Penny clutched her neck beneath the white scarf, a scarf that quickly turned red like the blood dripping down her chest and arms. It's not real. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream as she tried desperately to claim any air she could. Let me be crazy. Her whole body jerked again as her lungs failed to do the one thing that they were made for, and the more blood poured past her lips. The very thing meant to keep them alive, drowning her before his very eyes. This can't be real. Her skin grew paler, yet all Cal could focus on was her eyes. Her beautiful brown eyes that had always been so trustworthy and caring. Her amazing brown eyes that had always had a mischievous glint in them. Her wide eyes that filled with red and glazed over as Cal watched, unable to move towards his best friend. It took seconds, it took hours, it took days for her to fall. And all Cal could do was watch as his numb arms, legs, body refused to listen to him. He could still feel the splattered blood on his neck as he sat there, like icy claws scraping along his skin. He had never felt this cold before. She fell, and he watched, kneeling beside her, as all the color in the world drained out of her and dripped off the rock. Like a sacrifice to some long-forgotten god. He watched. He never did see those meteors. Thank you. I also have the pleasure of introducing our next reader. So, when I first met Alison, I thought, this is a gamer girl. We probably don't have a lot in common. It was a nice surprise to find out that I was only half right. We bonded over poetry, which was a little ironic considering we both tend to lean more towards fiction, and now it's rare for us to go more than a few days without talking. We talk about anything from books and anime to mythology and Renaissance, as well as showing off our shared skills in productive procrastination. On one particular instance, we, along with Alyzha, spent hours discussing the very detailed ins and outs of a relationship between two minor characters in her story. With her love of mermaids and dragons and magic, she's been playing with the idea for her book series for a long time now. A series where every manner of mythological and magical creature exists. Her ability to think several books ahead is something I envy, but it also only serves to make me more excited to read her books as they come out, and to find out what happens to her characters that I have already grown attached to. So please join me in welcoming our next reader, Alison Lopez.
Thank you, Tasha, for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody, and thank you guys all for watching on the live stream as well, and for our friends and family for coming. My story is called The Birth of an All-Seer. I will be reading chapter 3, which is not the beginning. The beginning starts with Lyra, our main protagonist, as she starts off with an ordinary everyday life, and we follow her as she gets evicted and then finds the deed to a childhood home she doesn't remember. Her and her friends then go to this childhood home only to celebrate her 21st birthday and get completely blackout drunk. And that is where this story starts. Cool water washes over Lyra's face as she presses the cloth to her eyes. It was a rough morning after she abruptly woke up just to toss the contents of her stomach into the nearest bathroom. Her head throbs with pain at every slight movement, and the bright morning sun stings her eyes. Every part of her body aches as she shuts off the faucet and removes the washcloth. She glances at the mirror, her reflection moving with her as she hangs up the washcloth and moves to the door. Something tugs at her thoughts, urging her back to her reflection. Her head throbs against the thought that tries to form in the front of her mind. She goes back to the mirror, this time taking in her whole reflection. Her long brown hair and pale skin are still the same, but the color of her eyes catches her attention. Her usual stormy gray eyes are now a bright neon blue, almost glowing in hue. What the hell? She rubs at her eyes, trying to clear them, yet the color stays the same. What the hell is going on? Lyra leaves the bathroom, seeking out one of her friends in hopes that they will dismiss her rising panic. Maybe I'm just going crazy. Is every hangover this bad? Lost in thoughts, Lyra rounds the corner into the kitchen, stopping abruptly and hiding behind the corner. Standing at the stovetop is an unfamiliar person with jet black hair and an odd movement about him. In his every movement, there is a flicker of an after-image effect. It's as if his body is constantly changing, unless being looked at directly. At times, his skin will turn green for a split second, or his ears change from a rounded human curve to that of something pointed and inhuman. Without waiting another second, Lyra looks for the closest swingable object to arm herself with. She grabs the fire poker sitting next to the living room fireplace and approaches the intruder. Armed and cautious, she's about to swing down on the man when he turns around and nearly drops the hot mug of coffee in his hands. Oi, Lyra, what the fuck? Desmond backs away from Lyra, a coffee mug outstretched in protection against the iron poker. Desmond? Confusion cools her racing mind as Lyra lowers the fire poker. The man sounds like Desmond, yet his glowing golden eyes and straight black hair are not the features of the Desmond she knows. Yes, it's me. Put the damn poker down before you hurt someone. Listen, I'm all for kinky poke and play, but it's too damn early for that. At least take me out to dinner first. An exasperated sigh escapes out of Lyra. Yeah, you would say that. What the hell happened to your hair? What do you mean? He averts his eyes before Lyra can ask more. A tired Fumiko and quiet Anthony come up behind her, eyeing the two of them with curious stares. Is this a new form of piñata where we smack Des till he gives us our coffee? Fumiko jokes as she slides into one of the chairs at the dining room table. Speaking of coffee, hey Des, pour me up a cup. Mama needs a precious fix. Anthony takes the fire poker from Lyra's hands. I'll put this back. No sense in hurting yourself this early in the morning. But wait, you guys don't see how different Des looks? He has black hair. Lyra stumbles for a way to describe the after-image-like movements, only to fumble her words entirely. Hun, the only thing different about him is the fact that he's not in all black for a change. His hair is still the same curly red as it's always been. You good? Fumiko eyes Lyra from the top of her phone quizzically. Lyra runs her hands through her hair, flushed with embarrassment. I'm not sure. I could have sworn he looked different, but if you say I'm crazy, maybe it's the hangover. Everything hurts and I feel like shit. Is that normal? Anthony comes back from the living room and leans in close to Lyra. Her embarrassment spreads to her face in an instant as she can feel the tips of her ears burn with how close he is to her. Desmond skirts around to both of them, handing Fumiko a fresh cup of coffee, taking the seat next to her. Anthony backs away after a moment of examining Lyra's face. Nothing looks different, but your eyes are really red. Have you been rubbing them? I was this morning, I guess. I thought I was seeing things. She still feels like she's seeing things as she hoists herself up on the corner of the counter at the far right corner of the room between the sink to her right and the stove to her left. How do eggs sound to everybody? Anthony rummages around the cupboard next to the stove opposite Lyra and pulls out a skillet. Sounds great, they all say in unison. Anthony pulls out various peppers, eggs, and sausage from the fridge. As Anthony throws together a scrambled egg skillet, Fumiko and Desmond chat over something on Fumiko's social feed. Pushing the unease from her mind, Lyra relaxes, relishing in this little moment surrounded by her friends. After breakfast, the group loads into the car again, heading back to Lyra's apartment to move the last for things. On the ride back, Lyra sleeps off her headache. Fumiko wakes her as they park behind the apartment complex. Feeling a little better, they leave the car and walk towards the front entrance of the building. Everything feels outlandish to her now as she walks down the city sidewalks. The buildings are the same, but what had been normal humans before she left was now a melting pot of different species mingling with humans. Lyra can't help but stare at the human-like faces with horns and antlers sprouting from their heads. Some creatures have tails swishing behind them, conversing over coffee with normal humans, laughing as if nothing is different. A red Chinese dragon flies between the skyscraper buildings, and Lyra stops, gaping at the sky. She turns to Desmond, pointing at the dragon. Did you see that? See what? The freaking dragon in the sky. Can't you see? Are you talking about the flock of birds? Fumiko points to where the dragon is, and Lyra can't help but swallow her words. Oh, yeah, sure. Birds. Flushed with embarrassment, Lyra forces her gaze to the ground and continues walking, avoiding the gazes of passerbys. Lyra, are you okay? Anthony asks, concern evident in his eyes. I guess. I think the stress is starting to get to me is all. Want to grab coffee? Desmond chimes in. Ooh, at the Misty Blue Cafe. Fumiko hops in excitement at the mention of their favorite coffee shop. Who's gonna move all the stuff then? You and Fumiko can start moving things while Lyra and I get coffee. Oh, but I want to go too. Fumiko pouts. Desmond pats her head and in a high baby voice says, oh, I'm sure you do, but Lyra needs a chill pill before we start moving things. We'll be quick. Fumiko huffs but agrees to Desmond's proposal. The group splits off at the apartment entrance and Lyra and Desmond walk to the Misty Blue Cafe. Lyra watches Desmond from the corner of her eye as they walk. She watches the way his movements leave a shadow of an image for a split second before solidifying into his human shape. The way his body moves has put her on edge all day. Now that it is just the two of them, the changes are far more noticeable. Don't worry, I'm not going to eat you. Though I'm sure you've got loads of questions. His nonchalance takes her aback. So I'm not going crazy. He lets out a quick laugh as he turns towards her. No, not yet, but what you are experiencing is unique to you and you alone. No one else can see what you are. We? Confusion bleeds into her words as thoughts race with questions. Yes, we, as in the mythics. We usually aren't seen in our real forms. For many, it's detrimental to be seen at all. Desmond continues casually, as if it's the most normal thing in the world, leaving Lyra blinking back her shock. Wait. So what are you? I'm a buka, or in simpler terms, a shapeshifter. Many stories about my kind come from Ireland, where I'm from. Why am I the only one who can see you like this? He sighs as they enter the plaza in front of the Misty Blue Cafe. That's why I brought you here. It would be better to let her explain it than me. Who's her? Desmond doesn't answer as he walks towards the Misty Blue Cafe. Something about the coffee shop seems off as they approach. What would usually be a full shop around lunchtime, like it is, now sits empty with the front sign turned closed. Desmond holds the door open for Lyra as she hesitantly enters. The smell of roasted coffee grounds and pumpkin waft about the room. Inside, the usual moody 20-something and the overly bubbly blonde stand next to a tall, muscular man covered in tattoos and black clothing. His dreadlocks are pulled back to show off two curling horns protruding from his head. He looks rather human despite the horns, and Lyra wonders what species he is, while simultaneously panicking. A short human in red with a black bob is sitting at the table in front of the others, and Lyra recognizes her as Etna from the other day. I brought her. Desmond slides into a chair beside M and waves Lyra over to do the same. Reluctantly, she sits down, eyeing the others with caution. It's nice to finally meet you, Lyra. You can call me M. I'm someone who might be able to help you with some of these changes you're experiencing since your awakening. I don't know what you mean by awakening. What am I? It's not a what, but more of a who, per se. You are an all-seer, someone with a fated ability to see mythical creatures that live beyond the veil of mortality. You see us for what we really are, in our true forms, past the glimmer or magic that many of us use to conceal our forms from mortal beings. But why me, and why now? What's so special about this ability? Lyra can feel the frustration bubbling over in her words. She tries to rein it in for some hope and answers. It's a bit more complicated, and unfortunately, some of it you will have to uncover for yourself. I can't tell you why this power chose you. Those secrets are kept within the family of the All-Seer bloodline. Did your parents not tell you of this ability? They should have prepared you for your awakening. Lyra looks down at the table, shoving down the tears that she refuses to release here. My parents are dead. I have no family. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Then I see no one has prepared you for this. It isn't much, but let me impart some of my understanding of the All-Seers onto you then. Since the beginning of time, mythical creatures have lived beside mortals. For a time it was in harmony. Yet, over time, greed and desire took root in the hearts of every creature, and corruption began to spread with no end. When the world was at risk of collapse, one being stood against the corruption and purified it. This later became the first All-Seer. Not much is known about the All-Seers other than that they are the balance keepers of the world. Their job is to keep the world in perfect harmony while being in neutral party to most of the world. Each All-Seer has the ability to see the mythics for what they really are, and in seeing them, they help everyone, not just the mortals. Over time, the mortals have forgotten about the days of harmony and now cause chaos amongst themselves. The task of an All-Seer is to help the balance and to keep the mythics species retaining balance amongst themselves, away from the eyes of the mortals. Some mortals accept who we are, such as Arya, and gestures to the bubbly blonde in the pastel pink. She stands with her arms crossed in front of her as the tall man drapes an arm around her. Looking at Arya fully, nothing about her stands out as inhuman to Lyra. Arya must be a human like me. Wait, am I even human anymore? Are all of you mythical creatures? Lyra asks. Yes, I am Fae. M points to Macbeth. Beth is a vampire. Desmond is a puka. She points to the tall, horned man. Ozzy is a half-breed of sorts. Only Arya is purely mortal. Am I not human still? With a heavy sigh, M pushes her pointed glasses up the bridge of her nose. Yes and no. You are a half-breed like Ozzy, but of a different kind. You still have the physical body of a human, but the power you possess is not mortal. When you had your awakening, did you notice something different about you? My eyes. They never used to be this bright blue color. Honestly, I thought I was hallucinating all day because of the hangover. A deep chuckle comes from Ozzy. Booze can do a lot of things, but that ain't one of them. I've felt delusional all day with how Des was brushing everything off. Like everything I was seeing was just me going crazy. M shoots a glare at Desmond. No, child, you're not delusional, but you are more vulnerable now. Vulnerable how? You're not the only one who can see the changes in your eyes. It is the mark of an all-seer, and any mythical creature can see it, including the ones who wish to eliminate the all-seer. Though the mythicals have been quiet for some time, there is unrest amongst the nation. A dark force has been gathering to plunge the world into chaos once more. It is probably for this reason why the power is awakened in you. We need your help to keep the balance in this world, Lyra. You're the only person who can do this. Lyra feels like someone chained her to the chair and tossed her into the North Sea. A sinking feeling forms a tightness in her stomach that creeps up to her chest, into her throat, suffocating her. The need to run far away grows with every second that ticks by in silence. She becomes hyper aware of everyone's weighted stare. The realization hits her like a ton of bricks. She is their last hope. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I hope that you can trust us. M states, Desmond did well gathering us while he noticed your presence in the city 2 years ago. What? A cold tightness burns as rage replaces fear. Des, you knew about this? All of this? Desmond and M exchange a look before he starts. Listen, Lyra, it's not like I kept it from you on purpose. I just had to be certain that my hunch was right. It's been several hundred years since the last All-Seer was on Earth. Not many people know what to look for. So you knew about everything, and you still didn't tell me? Lyra stands abruptly, the chair hitting the ground behind her. You made me think I was crazy, but this whole time you knew. You were supposed to be my friend, and yet you lied to me. But wait, Lyra, Desmond pleads. No, I'm not going to sit here another second and listen to your lies. Hot tears prick her eyes as Lyra bolts out the door, running into the cold air away from everything. She can hear into the distance someone shouting her name, but it doesn't matter. The thick, sinking feeling pulls her down further and further. Her throat feels so tight, like she could be gasping for air and still not able to breathe. She finds the nearest transit station and hops on, desperately trying to escape. Everything blurs around her as the panic numbs all rational thought. She sits down at the back of the bus, the overhead light showing the final destination, Wolfridge. Lyra pays no mind to the other people traveling on the bus with her. She leans her head against the cold metal frame on the bus window, questions flying through her mind as she looks outside at the twilight world passing her by. Why did it have to be her? Why now? Why hadn't her parents told her about any of this? Why did they have to leave her alone? Why did he lie? The cold loneliness pressing against her when all she needs is someone who can tell her the truth. Lyra shuts her eyes, trying to even out her breathing. Slow, deep breaths in, slow exhales out. After a while, she finds comfort in the darkness behind her eyelids. Seer. All seer. It is her. Yes, sir. Let's get her. Lyra jolts awake. The other passengers have left the bus, and the driver is motioning to her to get off. Hollow-faced specters surround the bus as Lyra steps onto the dirt path. They eye her, following her, as she tries her best to ignore their presence. Mind races. She remembers the way to the house. It wasn't far from town where she is now. Lyra turns down another dirt path leading to the woods and without looking back, takes off at a full sprint. Behind her, she can hear the giggling, shrill laughter of the specters following her, their translucent bodies floating close behind. Come here, All-Seer. No, leave me alone. Lyra sprints into the woods, leaping over fallen branches and sidestepping boulders as she runs in the direction of the house. Her lungs and muscles ache as she pushes them to go faster. Branches snag at her clothes, ripping the fabric and pricking her skin. Adrenaline and fear pump through her, pushing her over each hurdle. Faster. The specters close the distance, reaching their clawed fingers out to grab her as she leaps over the last fallen tree, its bark snagging her foot, tripping her. She skids across the forest floor, past the tree line, and into the overgrown front garden of the house. Scrambling to her feet, the specters rip at the air behind her, ripping her clothes and skin wide open. Crying in pain, Lyra runs to the house, up the front porch and past the front door, slamming it shut behind her. She latches the deadbolt and presses her back to the door. She can hear the cries of the specters as they scream for her. Something blocks them from coming up the front porch as Lyra watches them disperse through the peephole. Heaving for air, the adrenaline shaking her body, that drags her to the floor. She tucks her knees to her chest as guttural sobs rack her body. The ripping pain of her trust being burned, the suffocation of losing everything, all of it comes crashing down on her at once, and she desperately wishes the world would swallow her whole. She sinks into these feelings, trembling in the cold and adrenaline-fueled panic, when a warmth embraces her. She snaps her head up to see Anthony, his worry and concern for her evident in his eyes as he pulls her into his arms and holds her. His warmth breaking down her walls as Lyra cries into his shirt, desperately clinging to the only solid friend in the sea of uncertainty. And now I have the wonderful privilege to announce our last reader, Alyzha. If you've ever met Alyzha, you'll recognize her incredulous look as she looks upon you from her methodical crocheting. One look says it all, but behind those looks, is a mind that always is racing with fantastical ideas and curious questions. Alyzha has a way with words that is unlike any author I've ever met. Her attention to detail borders on obsession, as she once shared with me the amount of time it took her to calculate how long it would take a character to travel 150 miles from one kingdom to another on horseback while injured. It, in fact, takes 3 days. The 4 hours of dedication it took her to math out this scenario is just the tip of the iceberg in how dedicated Alyzha is to her writing. Her burning passion for her writing is so strong, not a single person would ever think her to be anything but an author. Many tears have been shed this semester because of this masterful storyteller, as she is my closest confidant in the writing work. Please welcome my dear friend, Alyzha.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. So tonight I will be reading the second chapter of my fiction in Koji. We start with the Duke dying. Our main character, Caird, he inherits the dukedom and is left with the responsibility of responding to a peace treaty from the rival dukedom of Noya. The next day, Caird scouted routes out of the manor. The catacombs had tunnels hidden in the shadows of the stone caskets that had the most direct route out of town. It was also a safe place to hide the mare he'd borrowed from the stables. It was early evening by the time Caird navigated his way back from the pantry with a pack of dried goods slung over his shoulder. Turning the last corner, he heard the door to his rooms open and the smarmy voice of a man echoing down the hall. "It's for the good of us all, milady. If he takes care of Vladimir, our problems will be solved." Caird watched the man who looked like a jester with a loud color splashed across his clothes back out of his rooms as if being pushed. "I understand, and I'll think about it. But please, sir, I'm tired and in mourning. Please leave." His mother spoke from behind the door, voice strained. The man, Lord Godric, caught sight of Caird in the hall and quickly straightened. "Then please excuse my intrusion, milady." He gave a quick bow to them both and shuffled in the opposite direction. "What was that about?" Caird asked when he got closer. His mother was hugging herself, but she wouldn't say anything. He took in her swollen eyes, the robe slipping off her shoulder. White-hot rage flooded him. He was about to follow that man and gut him, but Mary's exasperated sigh stopped him. "Caird, he didn't touch me. I'd have slit his smarmy little throat if he tried." She shifted her robe to show him her nightdress tucked behind the blade strapped to her thigh, something she never took off in an uncertain situation. He knew her usual arsenal was close by. "I swear if he ever does, I'll gut him, top to tail," Caird snarled, shooting one last look down the hallway before entering the room. He dropped his pack next to the door. Mary cast a sad glance at it before shuffling to the desk near the window. "Mum," Caird pressed, "what was Lord Godric doing here?" Her hands stilled in the rummaging through the drawers. "Nothing. He just wanted to remind me that O'Falley welcomes us with open arms." Mary winced at the terrible lie, but she knew Caird wouldn't ask further. "It didn't sound like that to me," he muttered, turning his back on her to change into his nightclothes. "What are you looking for?" Mary clicked the drawer shut. "Emmerich left you this." She pushed a leather case into his hands, a slip of paper tucked in the strap, keeping it closed. Caird looked between his mother and the case, brows furrowed. The letters on the note were shaky and dark, as if a heavy hand struggled to stay steady. "Never Belladonna." A small drawing accompanied the note. Caird cracked the case open. 6 of the 7 spaces held cigars. The musk overwhelmed his senses, dulling the burning in his veins. "Mom, why are you giving me a calmative?" Caird asked, suspicious. Mary wrung her hands, glancing between him and his bag. "Just in case," she shrugged. "You never know when you might need them." Caird could tell she knew he was leaving, but they were both dancing around the topic. He wanted to tell her the night before, but she'd have been disappointed in him. She always was when he let his emotion blind him. Had to clean up enough of his messes to be justified in her disappointment. But Ulster was expecting someone to come, and Caird didn't want to keep the Duke waiting. He had made sure the city could function without him for a week at most. Mary would have to understand. Everything would be fine after he came back. Everyone would be safer with Ulster dead. Caird left before sunrise the next morning. He left a note for his mother and didn't look back to see her standing in the window, waving at his shrinking form. His borrowed horse was sturdy enough for the 3-day ride to Noya and amenable to his magic tickling at her nose. He passed through areas Emmerich had promised to show him one day. Even though they were together for a week, Emmerich insisted that he call him Dad, insisted that now that they were together, they could finally be a family, take rides out to the dragon's hideaways, and play in the springs. The first night out was quiet. Every animal in the forest on edge, watching the smoldering man pass through. Even his steed was quiet, while he did his breathing exercise to compartmentalize the magic he had. The second night was the loudest. Claws skittered against trees and rustling bushes kept Caird on edge. The third night was the worst. He rested in a cave overlooking the forest surrounding Noya, watching the sun sink behind the manor in the distance. One tall tower speared the sky and cloaked the town below in shadow. The woods felt ominous then, the air surrounding it stagnant. He strained to see anything further when his stomach gave a sharp twist, bringing him to his knees. Caird saw smoke spill from his nail beds and felt the heat lurch up his throat, choking him. He thumped his chest, trying to dislodge whatever was in his throat, but thick flakes of charred skin fell to the ground. The heat filled his mouth and burned the root of his tongue and teeth. Waves of dense smoke cascaded from his lips. His body was on fire from the inside. Every organ, muscle, vein reduced to ashes. Rivers of smoke filled the cave and dragged him into unconsciousness. Caird woke with a distinct taste of ash and blood coating his tongue, and large brown horse eyes boring into him. He took out a cigar by feel, lighting it away from the horse. The heavy smoke slid down his throat, forcing him to cough it out. This must be what death tastes like. Every vertebra in his spine crackled as he stood from the heap he'd collapsed in. It took a while to scratch the tuft from his eyes and dust the flakes from his skin, careful to keep the ash from singeing his clothes. Once Caird crossed the border, the sick air stuck to his skin. Trenches of waste overflowed into the streets, coating the bare feet of the people who trudged through their day in the thick yellow sludge. Their masked faces were covered in dust. No one spoke, not willing to risk the air sticking in their lungs. Market stalls stood off the sloping main street, with merchants waving their wares at passerbys. It was nothing like the boisterous stalls in O'Falley, but the streets were just as crowded. The hill was clogged with hundreds of bodies, dust littering the air. Even with the slanted view, Caird couldn't see any gates to the upper city. He could only see the spire. It was immense from so far away, and it was an obvious symbol of power over the lower city. There was nothing unnatural alive in sight. The trees behind single-story huts were dry and drooping, the branches nearly touching the grassless ground. No breeze drifted through the side streets, only the rank smell of waste and filthy bodies. People wore a dazed expression, almost like they were as sick as the land and in pain from it. Caird struggled through the crowded street, avoiding some people, but crashing into others. It was high noon at the market square, and the sun glared down on their heads. Stalls of fresh roasted rat and dog were waving the scent into the street, gathering a swarm of people. Candied fruit sellers were surrounded by small children, waving their tiny, grubby hands for scraps. The silence was becoming unnerving, like their attention wasn't on the wares, but on him staggering through the streets. It wasn't long before people started grumbling when he passed them or waved a taste from their mouth. Caird knew they were complaining about him. The burning was obvious to anyone that touched him. The whispers were loud in the silence. The people he bumped into coughed discreetly, trying to rid the acrid taste of burnt apples from their throats. But there was nothing discreet about him. Caird was the only person in the street burning through a hashish cigar in the middle of the street. the only person hunched in on himself, avoiding eye contact. Caird hustled through the crowd, trying his best not to inflict himself on others, but the streets were more crowded the further in he got. He bumped into a particularly burly man and fell to the ground. Caird couldn't see anything past the immense number of legs coming towards him. It seemed like he would get trampled, but the legs gave him a wide berth. The burly man brushed himself off like Caird left dirt on him. "Oi, keep your dying to yourself," he spat, and crashed his way through the crowd. Caird caught him muttering, "Out here trying to suck magic out of people who can't even help their damn selves." Caird looked around at the sagging faces of the people passing him. No one would look at him. Some would even shuffle their children away. Did they know? An old woman kneeled in front of him, her wooden cane lying beside her. "Where's your warden, child?" The concern in her eyes reminded him of his mother. Her eyes shone and squinted at him in the same way. "I need to find your duke," Caird said. "No, you need a warden. We can't have you dying in the street for the dogs to eat." Her tone was sharp, and the distance she kept from him was obvious. I can keep without a warden for a few more days." He held out the cigar he'd been smoking. "I need to speak with your duke, mother." The woman sighed in defeat. Caird wasn't budging, and she didn't want to stay out in the midday heat. "Head towards the spire, then. He never comes out here." Slowly, she lifted herself from the ground, leaning heavily on her cane. The crowd dispersed with her, clearing the path in front of him. Caird finally had a clear view of the gates tangled in withered vines. On the steps of his manor, Matteo stood in full regalia. The sun burned his eyes as it reflected off the bleached cobblestones of the courtyard. The peal of the bells rang throughout the city, sounding the alarm for a fire in the lower town. 15 knights stood in formation on the steps and looked toward him for orders. The Duke had specified these 15 must meet the foreign retinue, and not even his son could override his order. He seemed to think that these were most loyal to the throne. "These knights are mine." Matteo straightened the collar of his shirt. "I need 10 of you to help with organizing and quelling the panic. Keep the people safe. The others will remain here to escort our guest," Matteo barked. 10 knights at the bottom of the staircase bowed and made haste. Words weren't needed here. His knights were loyal to him, answered only to him. Their obedience was the only acknowledgement he needed. They knew how much he sacrificed for his people. The scars on his body from the lashes, the scars on his mind from the wars. The knights knew but couldn't step between the Duke and the power he wielded over his son. Once the bells stopped tolling, the air stung at Matteo's skin, goose flesh trailing down his neck. He moved a hand onto the pommel of his sword, on guard for any attacks against him. "I seek an audience with your Duke Vladimir." 12 eyes snapped to the man who'd suddenly appeared at the bottom of the stairs. A heavy purple cloak hung from his frame. His black locks were piled on top of his head, loose strands hanging in his face. He bent under the weight of the cloak, but his dark fingers clung to the fabric. Matteo saw the heat from the cloak distort the air around his shoulders. Even he was sweating under the layers of his doublet, vest, shirt, dark breeches, leather boots. Everything was sticking to him. Matteo stepped down the stairs, spine straight. "The Duke is indisposed at the moment. I can bring your message to him." His voice was steady despite the prickling on his skin. "He'll want to see me," the man growled in Matteo's face as he shoved a rolled parchment into his chest. His hands were rough, covered in thick patches of skin, and shook where it was pressed, but his eyes pierced Matteo in place, a blue like the sky before a storm. Matteo looked at the broken seal, a falcon carrying arrows, and his father's scrawl staining the page. "Duke Vladimir requests the presence of a representative of O'Falley to appear before him before Saturday, the 5th of May, 1584. Matteo's eyebrows scrunched in confusion. These were the vaguest summons he'd ever seen. "I'll bring you to the audience hall then." He stepped aside, straightening his doublet. He could feel the man's eyes looking him over. "I'm Matteo, first son of Noia. No crown?" Matteo pressed his lips together to keep the sneer off of his face. In Noia, only the Duke wears a crown. He cracked his knuckles, hoping the venom in his tone wasn't noticeable. "And your name?" Caird. His head bobbed as Matteo led them through the manor, a stark contrast to his hostile tone. "What, no title?" Matteo fired back. In O'Falley, I don't need one, Caird scoffed. It seems like a coincidence, but you came after a fire was reported. Caird kept his eyes straight ahead, taking in the elaborate tapestries depicting the legendary tale of Vladivin's reign, his wedding, the slaughter of beasts, his wife's sickness, his son's birth. They conveniently leave out the selling of his firstborn daughter and the poisoning of the Duchess. Is that a question? Caird whispered. He sounded amused, and Matteo chuckled. No remorse, no consideration for the potential lives lost. The thud of their boots slowed as they neared the studded doors to the hall. 2 ceremonial suits of armor flanked the entrance, each holding an executioner's axe. The wicked curve of the blades faced away from the doors, a sign of goodwill. Matteo watched as Caird shrugged his cloak off, leaving his arms bare. A patchwork of scars and tattoos traveled up from his wrist, disappearing beneath a dark brown vest that almost blended into his skin. Most of his locks stayed in a loose bun on top of his head, but half were left hanging, brushing the base of his spine. Matteo caught himself admiring them, wanting to twist his fingers in Caird's hair and pull, see how hard he could pull to get those blue eyes on him. Matteo's own tight curls were confined in a thick braid down his back, a warrior's braid, tucked beneath his clothes out of reach of wandering hands. Matteo pushed open the heavy doors, leading the way to the oversized oak table. It was too large for the room, but the Duke wanted to flaunt his wealth, said it cowed weaker lords. My lord, the representative, Matteo presented the parchment to his father, careful not to touch him. Sit down, Matteo, Duke Vladimir ordered, batting the summons away with his jeweled gauntlet. Everything about him dripped in opulence. The gold crown left indents in his scalp. His thinning hair was doused in heavy perfumed oil that left stringy clumps framing his ruddy, swollen face. His fat body was stuffed into a purple suit stitched with buckling gold thread. Duke Vladimir could not have looked more like a rich pig. Caird noticed Matteo's wrinkled nose as he lowered himself in his seat next to the Duke. His body was stiff, eyes burning holes in the wall behind Caird. This whole farce was grating on Matteo's already frayed nerves, and he made it obvious he did not want to be near his father. Usually, he would send Matteo out to conquer various areas claimed by warlords, never marry him off like some broodmare. That's what his sister was for. Too bad that didn't work out for him. Matteo knew the endless campaigns were to keep him from gaining power with the court, but I don't need the court, father, or this dead land. Duke Vladimir leaned forward in his own seat. You've met my son, haven't you? Pride of our house. Matteo huffed. It was rare that his father complimented him, let alone referred to him as his son. You have read the proposed treaty, I assume, the Duke continued. Servants scurried around the room, placing wooden goblets in front of Caird and Matteo, a silver one encrusted with precious stones in front of Vladimir. Caird felt the faint magic in the stones vibrating. Caird passed a frustrated hand through his hair. It thumped on the back of his seat. Matteo's breath caught in his throat as his eyes focused on him. The bright blue burned into him. Are you scared? Caird's grin was full of teeth. Fear not, I'm to be your betrothed. Matteo blinked at Caird before arranging his face into a shocked expression. He'd known days before this meeting that this would be the case. The spies had already briefed him, but something about Caird pulled at him, called it something primal in him. Duke Vladimir grinned back at Caird. And what say you? For peace? Caird leaned forward, perched his head on his interlaced fingers, and stared the Duke down, noticing the wrinkles tugging his forehead, the madness that dulled his eyes. You think me wet behind the ears, Caird decided, that I don't know you. Matteo felt the grin tug at his lips, the cutting tone, the glare, the stiff posture, everything about him said offended king. But do you think I don't know O'Falley? They're selling their own people to warlords. Caird's eyes slid over Matteo's face, taking in his smothered smile and focused gaze. You didn't care who came. You just wanted a representative, he spat, but refocusing on Vladimir. Smoke drifted off his tongue and swirled up into the rafters of the arched ceiling. Matteo was a panting beast, waiting for Caird to beat his father low, keep talking, eviscerate him, humiliate him. It was clear that your intention is to have us marry on Noya's lands, which would put me under your laws. Mateo snatched a glance at his father. From the smile hid behind his goblet, he didn't care. This meeting was a mere formality anyway. He would whip the approval out of Mateo or have him marry Carrot's corpse if necessary. You, Carrot pointed with his pinky, have been trying to infiltrate O'Falley since Mateo was born. Vladimir snorted at this, but Carrot kept talking, kept fierce eye contact. Once I marry your son, I and my entire city will be subject to your laws. His nails gouged the table, and we both know what you love to do with your laws. You would slaughter anyone to maintain your crown. Smoke slithered from Carrot's mouth. I can smell your greed, Butcher King, and you will not take my land. Vladimir fell into a fit of laughter. And yet I will. I have done plenty for this land. And what has your lord done, huh? Taken in some slaves and cripples, then died miserably. He had nothing. He built nothing. I have built a nation. You have butchered nations, Carrot screamed. The floor underneath him splintered. You've butchered nations, your own peasantry, even your own son. You'd use him for your own ends. Duke Vladimir straightened in his throne, glaring at Carrot. That is his duty to his sovereign. He has no use otherwise. No use, Carrot scoffed. Like my father had no use. Is that why you killed him? Duke Vladimir smiled. His eyes narrowed. Killed who? Carrot's magic was slipping from him again, could feel it raging inside him. He brought another cigar to his lips, taking a deep drag. I hope you rot in hell. Carrot spat with a mouthful of smoke. He stormed out of the hall, door slamming shut behind him. Then I'll see you there, you filthy magus, Vladimir howled after him. Mateo stared at his father's profile, watching his brow work. You wouldn't, Mateo said, but he knew he would. Was quite familiar with what this man was capable of. I wouldn't what? Use your words, Mateo. Vladimir was calm, relaxed even. Slaughter his city? Vladimir laughed. You'd believe the words of some stranger over your own duke. You have one last lie, father. Give me something to redeem you with. Is what he said true? Mateo's head snapped to the side, eyes blurring from the force of the royal gauntlet striking his temple. Do not question me, boy. Duke Vladimir snarled. His cape wafted the scent of rotten roses behind him as he walked out. Of course, sire, Mateo sneered, wiping the blood from his chin.
Thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful evening. Another round of applause for our